Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. The Season 3 Reloaded update obviously included several major meta updates across the board, nerfing some of the top tier weapons, buffing some of the more underwhelming weapons, and today we're going through the general overview of the new Warzone meta update. We are, of course, back here on our tier list, ranking every single gun in the game to adjust it accordingly so you guys know exactly which guns you need to be focusing on if you're trying to level some up or maybe work on some builds for ones that you want to be using, right? So over to my right, I've got my handy dandy list of all the notes that changed here throughout Season 3 Reloaded. First things first, we've got to rank our brand new weapon, the BAL-27. And after seeing the full-on stats come out for this thing, it's kind of awkward because the consistency is not all there. Just because the first 4 bullets fire a little bit slower than the rest of the magazine. So that does impact the TTK depending on when you're landing your shots, right? Or when the back-to-back shots are landing. But for the most part, this thing is actually up there with some of the other more competitive rifles. I would say it's a little bit more borderline top tier competitive depending on where in the fire rate you are landing the majority of your shots. But if you can get that faster fire rate up there and land the majority of your shots there, this thing absolutely is in that sort of top tier area. It does help that it's a bit lower recoil as well, so it's relatively easy to use. You can also kit it out to be a little bit more versatile there too. So it's relatively consistent, but that fire rate change is going to impact some gunfights here and there. Now, beyond the BAL-27, we saw a ton of weapon buffs and nerfs. Some of them were a little bit more impactful than others. Like for instance, the BP-50 just got some hip fire nerfs. That's not really a huge deal, and quite frankly, with how this update played out, with certain nerfs to other weapons that we'll get to here in a moment, I honestly think the BP-50 jumps up into the absolute meta category right now. With how it stands with its TTK and its versatility, this thing is an absolute go-to in my opinion. The SVA-545 also ended up seeing some adjustments as well to its hip fire, just simply nerfing it a tad bit, but again, not anything that significant that's going to impact a rifle meta, and inadvertently, it really does become better and more competitive over the long range. I feel like this one could and should be considered an absolute meta rifle as well. Now, this is a surprising one. The Ram 7, I'm honestly going to be pretty harsh on here because they nerfed its close range damage and its mid range damage and its long range as well. This thing is worse everywhere. It already was relatively mediocre leading up to the Season 3 Reloaded update beyond like 35-40 meters, and now in its close range, which was its only strength, it's not going to be outgunning anything. So this thing, I would say, honestly drops down into that competitive category, quite frankly. It's just not it anymore. It had a long time towards the top of the meta, but it's time for a change there. The revolving door has finally hit it. The MTZ-556 also saw some hip fire nerfs. This is one that, again, I think is probably a little bit overdue from jumping up into the top tier category, but those hip fire nerfs are not going to be anything impactful on this either. The Holger 556 also got some hip fire nerfs. Again, I'm not concerned. The MCW actually ended up seeing some mid-range and some long-range damage buffs, which is nice because that's where it needed to see some increases. Although I will say for the rifle version of the MCW, its long range is still a little bit underwhelming. When you get into 45, 50, 60 meters, it's not going to be as quick to kill as other meta rifle options. But I do think we have to consider the ranking here with the MCW conversion kit, the more popular version of the weapon right now, and that 100% is the sniper support meta. So maybe put like a little asterisk in here mentally, right? This is an absolute meta placement for the MCW conversion kit, not just the base rifle, but that thing's TTK in the close range and even the mid range prime for that sniper support playstyle is nuts. All right, folks, G Fuel has gone and done it. They've created what I would consider to be the best of both worlds, G Fuel and protein in one. That's right, we got our G Fuel energy plus protein, 15 grams of protein, 140 milligrams of caffeine. I'm about to try it for the very first time and see what I think. So 3 different flavors. They've got mocha, French vanilla latte, and then chocolate, I think is what I'm gonna try. See what it's like. All right, so I've got it in my cup of almond milk. Personally, I prefer my chocolate flavors with milk. You could also mix it with water if you wanted to, kind of whatever is your preference, but I'm gonna shake it up, mix it nice and well, give it a try. As far as taste goes, I mean, brownie milkshake, chocolate milkshake kind of vibes. I like it. And honestly, it's solid. Nice blend of like brownie, chocolate cake, chocolate milkshake. Think of all of that in one. I honestly really like it. Not to mention, you're getting 15 grams of protein out of this, but also 140 milligrams of caffeine. Like, that's the perfect combo. As someone who, especially in recent years, has really tried to focus a lot more on my health, you know, healthy body, healthy mind, I'm always searching for solid sources of protein that are just convenient throughout the day. And I mean, fill a cup up of milk, throw in the protein powder, shake for a little bit. You get a taste like that, I'm sold. So if you're interested in trying the energy and protein mix from G Fuel, I'll leave a link down in the description below. Toss in code Immortal at checkout, you'll get a nice little discount. Now, for whatever reason, they made a ton of changes to the FR556. They buffed its strafe, its velocity, its torso, and arm multipliers. Then they went through and buffed a ton of the attachments, but its TTK is still not all that great, all things considered. The burst does make it kind of awkward, and so it's still competitive. It's just definitely a much better competitive version of itself than it was pre-update. The M13B got some close damage buffs, a headshot multiplier nerf, but then a torso, hand, and arm multiplier buff. So kind of all over the place. Admittedly, its close range is not where you're going to be using this thing the most, so that's not a super impactful buff there. It's still competitive, but nothing all that crazy. Now, the Razorback, which was already a decently competitive MW2 rifle, especially for like the mid-range sort of sniper support area, ended up getting some mid and long range damage buffs, which is solid. It's one that really is borderline being right there with these other top tier rifles, and I think it certainly has a place in this category. This is one that I'm certainly keeping my eye on as a potential great MW2 option. The Avancer, another great sniper support MW2 gun, got some decent upgrades here. It got a near, mid, and long range damage buff across the board, so pretty much everywhere becomes slightly better, which is great to see. It's not going to be an absolute meta gun because it is an MW2 rifle, but it's still very good. Now, this is a pretty important one here. The SOA Subverter, it got a long range damage nerf and then a close range nerf. So in the close range and even some of the mid range, it's still going to have a decent TTK. It's just really slow, so that's not like its prime area to play. Long range, it's going to be significantly worse though, especially with the control factored in. So I would say this one drops down into the top tier category. I'm not sure if I would full on send it down into, like, let's say the competitive category or below, because its mid range is still really effective, and I'm sure we're plenty familiar with it for the long range still. But in terms of being that #1 TTK rifle anymore, that's just not the case. So that's definitely a solid nerf to balance the meta some. And the MTZ762 got an ADS buff. That's solid, but it's still super limited by its ammo capacity, and its TTK isn't like game breaking anymore, so that's not going to be super impactful there. The SO14 also got some full auto mobility buffs, which is cool, but its full auto TTK isn't really that competitive, so it stays incompetitive. Another big one here, the HRM9. It got a close damage nerf, a mid damage nerf, and a max range nerf, so its closest damage range got nerfed as well. Now, this is not a nerf that is going to make this completely obsolete. I still think a lot of people are going to run the HRM9, but this is now more of a competitive SMG really than anything else. Like, this is a decent nerf to this thing that definitely knocks it out, borderline top 5, I would say. It's usable for sure, and if you build it out for mobility, it's going to have a crazy good ADS and sprint to fire, which will allow it to outgun other SMGs in its first damage range, but it's pretty much limited to now just that first damage range, whereas before it was super versatile. So for ultra close range, I would say this is still a viable option, but it's definitely not something I'd be running over a lot of the other subs right now. Now, the Ram 9 did end up getting a recoil nerf here too, and quite frankly, its TTK is not anything all that crazy. I feel like competitive is probably a bit more of an appropriate ranking for it, similar to the HRM9 in a lot of ways, just a tad bit slower in terms of mobility, so that's a decent nerf to balance that out too. Now, the Rival 9 did catch some buffs, some long overdue buffs, I would say. It got a close damage buff, a close range buff, and then also hand, arm, and lower torso multiplier buffs. Its TTK is still not going to be right up there with the better options, but it's getting there for sure. I think it needs maybe 1, maybe 2 more adjustments, and it'll be up there with like the Strikers and the Wasp 9 and whatnot. For now, though, it's going to stay as a competitive SMG just because its close range damage is still just a tad bit lacking, but it's getting there, and that's good. And by the way, as we are going through all the weapon adjustments here today, quick reminder, if you are new to the channel, every single day I got you covered with news, updates, patch notes, meta breakdowns. So if you want to guarantee you're always up to date, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. And if you enjoy this video, do me a favor, drop a like on it. It's always really appreciated. Next up, the Wasp 9 ended up getting a sprint to fire buff, which is huge because this thing's open bolt delay was always limiting it some with its sprint to fire factored in. But now this thing, even with the open bolt delay, is so aggressive and so fast, and quite frankly, I would consider this to be an absolute meta SMG right now. This thing's TTK is phenomenal. It's got good mobility, easy to use, it's checking all the right boxes. The Striker also got some updates. It got a mid-range buff and a long-range damage buff as well, which is pretty surprising. This thing is incredibly versatile for an SMG, and honestly, I would say that this one has a chance to be an absolute meta sub as well. It's probably the most fringe, absolute meta, top tier SMG here, but I'm feeling generous today. I think there's a good case for this being a great great sniper support SMG, and overall just really, really dominant. And even though it wasn't directly adjusted with this update, some of the nerfs to things like the HRM9 and whatnot make the Striker 9 even more appealing here. And that personally, I think, is one of the better SMGs as well. Personally and statistically, I should add. Great TTK, pretty easy to use, fantastic movement. These are the big three now when it comes to the SMG meta. We did see one shotgun adjustment. The Riveter got an ADS spread buff, basically an ADS spread decrease, so it'll be a little bit more accurate. Not going to really change it all that much though. Now the DG58 ended up getting a torso, hand, and arm multiplier buff, which is huge. And I think this thing absolutely is a long range meta option right now. This thing is so good, arguably the best LMG in the game. It's low recoil, heavy hitting, loving the feel of that thing. Now the Bruin, which previously was the #1 LMG and has been for quite some time, definitely saw some decent nerfs here. So ended up getting a close damage nerf and then a leg and lower torso multiplier nerf as well. And quite frankly, it drops it down a decent amount here. It's close to mid-range, is not really anything all that great. And even its long range now suffers a bit too. So I'm saying this is a little bit more in line with like the Peel Yacht conversion kit. It's still competitive, you could use it, but there are certainly many better LMG options just across the board, whether you're focusing on the mid-range or the long range. The Eradicator ended up getting an ADS and a sprint to fire buff. That's solid because this thing's really good in the close and the mid-range for an LMG, so that's just sort of enhancing that even more. Now, as I'm recording this, these changes apparently aren't fully live, but it's also not going to have a huge impact on the meta. But the Stalker, the Cat, and the Moors all ended up getting some velocity nerfs. The Moors also got a slight ADS nerf as well. But with this, they're all still the meta snipers, the one-shot snipers that we have, across the board. So they're going to stay in absolute meta. You just have to focus a little bit more on upping that velo if you really want them to be easier over those longer distances. Now the Wasp Stinger ended up getting a torso multiplier buff. That's cool. The Akimbo Wasp Stingers on paper have a crazy broken TTK. In application though, it just doesn't really translate all that much. So still more of a mediocre, maybe competitive pistol, but it's nice that it's a little bit better now. Then also the Akimbo Damon pistol got some buffs just across the board to make them a little bit more friendly. Not really something I'd recommend running all that much, though they're definitely mid. I think that's the most fitting definition for them. And as it stands, that's how the meta plays out here post Season 3 Reloaded. Definitely a little bit healthier across the board. Nice to see that we have a good mix of close range, mid range, and long range options in the absolute meta category. Top tier offers several great choices as well, and there's plenty of competitive guns that you can mess around with. Maybe they won't be the best, but they can hold their own in certain situations just fine. So you'll love to see that. That is going to wrap things up for this video though. If you enjoyed, do me a favor, drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy. Have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.